So we wanted to focus more on pellets. We have, unfortunately, one of our speakers couldn't make it, Christiane Egger, who many of you know. She's a leading advocate for wooden pellet heating in Europe. She's based in Austria, and she has really bad flu, not COVID, but a very bad flu. She couldn't make it. So Darian Dye, our policy analyst, will be speaking in her place. Next slide. Okay, a little about the Alliance for Green Heat. So Alliance for Green Heat is a very small nonprofit based in Maryland. We started in 2009. We're an independent nonprofit, 501c3, and we are dedicated to promoting cleaner and more efficient wood heating. And we support all sorts of renewable heat, or low carbon heat, I should say, including heat pumps. And our expertise and our focus, of course, is on wooden pellet heaters in the residential sector. We're very supportive of wooden pellet and chip heating in commercial and institutional settings, but that's not our exact expertise. We have 4 staff, mostly on the top row, and as I say, our people are our strength. We've operated on a relatively low budget since our founding, so we've had a lot of fantastic fellows, interns, and people willing to work for less than they could make in the private sector. Most of our funding now comes from the USDA and also the DOE and Osprey Foundation. And our flagship programs are funding firewood banks and the Wood Stove Design Challenge. And if any of you don't get our newsletter, I would encourage you to sign up on our website. It's a great source of information. Next slide. Okay, just a short introduction to this issue. And the first point is something I just discovered the other day, is that in 2022, 2022, for the very first time, residential solar PV produced more energy than residential wood and pellet heating in BTUs. So what this means is that I think a lot of people have not appreciated that wood and pellet heating has been the leading way for households to reduce fossil fuel until 2022, last year. And it took solar PV a few decades to catch up, with enormous subsidies and policies throughout the country. And it's a good thing that solar PV is gaining rapidly, but I think it's important that we don't lose sight of how much fossil fuel our community has been offsetting and continues to offset. And so things are changing. Residential air source heat pumps have come on quickly and in a very big way. They're growing rapidly. Estimates often say about 10 to 13% year over year. And in the pellet sector, the pellet production, and we'll hear more about pellet stove sales from Karen Smeltz, has been relatively stable. So we're not seeing a ton of growth in the pellet sector, but we are very curious what the prospects for pellet heating are and how we can best pair pellet heating with heat pumps. So with that short introduction, I'm going to turn it over to the speakers. Our first speaker is Adam Sherman. Adam is on board of directors of the Alliance for Green Heat and a close friend. We are both rock climbers, so Adam and I have been able to rock climb together a bit, which has been great. Oh, I forgot, housekeeping. Okay, each speaker has 8 minutes. We'll take a few questions after each speaker. You can raise your hand on your screen. In the meantime, please keep yourself muted. We have some polls for everyone to take. This will be recorded, so you can look at it later. And we'll have more time for questions at the very end. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we are to Adam. Adam is a senior consultant at VEIC up in Vermont. He was at the Biomass Research Center before that. And It's incredible background in wooden pellet heating, and we are pleased to have him on this webinar. Adam, let's turn it over to you. Adam says he's blocked from the video. Adam, you are on mute. Adam may not be able to unmute himself.
Well, I can talk.
Okay.
I was being blocked from video by the host has stopped it, so I apologize for the delayed jumping in, but at least I am now unmuted. So maybe I'll just stay off camera. And thank you for the introduction, John, and thanks to the Alliance for Green Heat and everyone for being here today. I'm delighted to share some thoughts about decarbonization of buildings in rural regions of the US using a combination of electrification and advanced wood heating, and explore some high-level thoughts on how advanced wood heat can help electrification go further, faster, and possibly with fewer hiccups along the way. So next slide, Darian. So a little bit about VEIC, the organization I work for. We are a mission-driven nonprofit. We're about 36, 37 years old, and our mission is to generate the energy solution the world needs. Specifically, our organization has a long and deep history as the administrator of several energy efficiency utilities across the country. And then we work in a wide range of states and a little bit into provinces in Canada, providing national consultancy and advising states, utilities, and businesses on how to decarbonize across energy efficiency, the clean and flexible grid, building decarbonization, and including transportation electrification. Next slide. So I'm based in Vermont, and our organization works all across the country. I have some data and some slides that I'll be showing from Vermont, not to hold Vermont up on a pedestal or anything. It was just really the availability of data and really trying to use what I show with some of these Vermont specifics and use them as representative of what could be happening in other states. So this provides a high-level visual of the road ahead and the task and kind of this daunting task of meeting our GHG emission targets by the year 25 and showing how those different categories stack up in the historical performance from the 1990s to today. And really the daunting task of how we need to drive that down dramatically to meet our overall goals by 2050. So you can see that transportation is a big piece of that, the green at the bottom, and then building thermal energy is the next orange wedge there, and then smaller wedges on top of that. Next slide. So diving into some of the specifics behind that first graph, energy in Vermont is electrical energy is not a big overall piece of it, and our electric energy is mostly renewable already. We're 66% renewable in our electrical generation makeup. Thermal energy accounts for almost half of the total energy, and only about 26% of the thermal energy is from renewables, and in Vermont that's mostly wood. And then our transportation sector, which is a big chunk of things, we are 95, 94% non-renewable. And so it's really the thermal and the transportation side that make up the very large components of our GHG emissions, as shown in the graph on the right-hand side. Agriculture, industrial processes both emit more GHGs than our carbon footprint of our electric mix in Vermont. Next slide. So a big push to meeting those targets is going to be electrification and the deployment of air source heat pumps. Obviously air source heat pumps, everyone's familiar with them. And they come in various shapes and sizes, and ground source heat pumps, are more efficient and can perform differently than air source heat pumps. But air source heat pumps will, be a huge piece of the overall thermal energy electrification push. And so we're seeing that in Vermont, we're seeing that in the Northeast, and we're seeing that all over the country. The fine print with the air source heat pumps is just their performance is driven by the outdoor air temperatures. And so as in the graph on the right, the blue line goes up, the demand for heat in a building increases as the outdoor temperature decreases. That's that blue line on the graph. And with air source heat pumps, their output as outdoor temperatures decrease, they can maintain temperature, but their efficiency, and they work harder, requiring more electricity to keep up with the demand as the outdoor temperatures decrease. So there is this balance point where in some cases there's need for supplemental heating. And this graph is a little overly simplistic, and the performance of especially cold climate heat pumps is getting a lot better. So this is an older graph that probably shows a balance point that's way too high, and it's probably more down towards 0 degrees in terms of heat pump performance. But this isn't a bad thing or the end of the world. It's just a reality of the equipment and the technology, even though it is getting better over time. This is not a big deal when it's playing out at 1 or 2 buildings here and there. But if we look at kind of landscape market transformation and homes and buildings all across the state and region electrifying at once, that need for the most amount of electricity when the temperatures are the coldest, is a real concern. Next slide. So, when we have the convergence of demand for the most amount of energy, electrical energy from the grid, and when it's the coldest, this is data from 2021, and it's the ISO New England grid mix for the entire year. It's been filtered to the times when outdoor temperature is below 70. But you can see a strong correlation that when we have the coldest temperatures, we're seeing the highest amount of demand and the most amount of time intervals when there is coal and oil, at least in the mix. That's not like exclusively coal and oil, but they're definitely at these times, the ISO New England grid, which is by and large very clean, we're needing to just deploy coal and oil to meet these high demands. And with electrification, this is data from 2021 with electrification and massive build out of this market to electrify. That pattern will only be magnified with the deployment of air source heat pumps. So you can see the strong correlation. Obviously, to the right-hand side, there would be an upswing for summer peaking to meet cooling loads in the summer, but we filtered this graph to just kind of the temperatures below 70 degrees. Next slide. So, one of the many ways in which we can create a hedge against this risk and minimize the impacts is the synergy and the complementary deployment of wood heating and air source heat pumps. And I include these 2 photographs taken from 2 personal friends of mine, their homes, where you can see a heat pump up in the upper left corner and a pellet stove, and then a cordwood stove in the photo on the right, and then there's a red circle around the heat pump, the head inside the building that's hiding there. Now this can happen in a single home, as these 2 photos portray, but it can also be some homes with all wood heating, and some homes with all electric heating with heat pumps. So how we work them together, the synergy can play out in an individual building where you have both systems deployed, or it can be across a broader geographic area where some buildings are heated exclusively with one or the other. Next slide. So to kind of look at some scenarios of what the potential impact could be on the grid with an all-in electrification, I worked with a colleague of mine last year, Michael Fink, to run some load scenarios, taking actual ISO New England grid load data for Vermont for the week of January 24th to the 28th in 2022, which was a particularly cold week. And the blue line shows the actual real data. And then we modeled two different scenarios. One looking at mass deployment of the residential market with 100% cold climate heat pump adoption, and looking at the load growth impacts during this 5-day period in January, and that represents the red line on this graph. So that's a dramatic peak load that in these conditions would probably be met with fossil fuels. We then ran another scenario looking at a 70% wood heat deployment during that time to somewhat abate those electrical grid demands, and that is the green line there. So you can see that wood heating can play a very vital role, a complementary role to a whole slew of other strategies to help shave peaks and fill valleys, which is the optimization that grid operators are looking for. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So this is just how it looks like in a table. If you can go back real quick. Great. So just showing how you can kind of optimize this, where we have outside temperatures being in the moderate range and grid status being normal. You're really pushing on the cold climate heat pumps. As you move towards colder and peaking, you would see a greater reliance on advanced wood heating to kind of be that hedge against the peaks. Next slide. So one passing thought is, and thinking about the grid reliability and shaving peaks and filling valleys, storage is a big piece of that. One interesting piece that I want to share with this audience is that a former colleague of mine had pointed out to me is the amount of potential energy in wood fuel and how that can function as energy storage. And just running some fun back of the envelope calculations, cordwood, when you look at the energy value, it's the equivalent of 345 Tesla Gen 2 Powerwalls. So in terms of reliability and storage, I think it's an interesting way to look at energy storage and how wood can play that role. Next slide. So to wrap it up, in Vermont, we're looking at an integrated approach for decarbonizing our thermal energy mix, heat pumps, weatherization, heat pump water heaters, a little bit of renewable natural gas, and advanced wood heating. And while we're pushing that in Vermont with this integrated approach, I share for people's consideration that this could be deployed in a lot of other states around the country where you have cold temperatures, forest resource, and rural areas where wood heating is a good fix. So I'll leave it at that and turn it back over to John and Darian.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Adam. That's great. I'm now going to turn it over to Frank. Frank is represents Lignetics, which is now by far the largest pellet producer in North America. And which means, Frank, you have a lot of people looking to you to make sure they have enough pellets this winter. It's a challenge that I think may even be easier with such a big company that owns pellet mills all across the country. But I should say, Frank, their company is not just about heating pellets. They're diversified and showing the value of wood in many sectors. Okay, turn it over to you, Frank.
Great, thank you, John, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts. Go ahead to the next slide. So yeah, title complementary solutions, and we'll get into what that means. And I'll start off with the vision, and the reason for that is not to convince you that Lignetics is a great company and that you know, I'm trying to pitch Lignetics overall, but as John highlighted, we're really focused on the utilization of wood residuals. That happens to have been, and you know, as John noted as well, by far we are the largest domestic manufacturer of pellets for home use. That has led to heating pellets being our #1 product, but we are very actively engaged in a number of other categories currently, and continue to explore many others. While we have 25 manufacturing locations across the country, none of them are in Colorado, though that is where we are based. Next slide. So one of the things that you know, really we're seeing as a tremendous opportunity in this space in general is that there's a confluence of things happening. There's certainly market interest and demand for sustainable products. There are some excellent policies in place, and we hope to add to that list policies that support both from a manufacturer standpoint, but also from a consumer standpoint, the use of renewable energy. And we want to ensure that biomass is fairly represented in that arena. And then I would say there's really been a renaissance in the technical understanding of biomass and what we can do with it in terms of other applications, but even in the case of heating, making it combust cleaner, having a higher BTU content, and making it more consistent from batch to batch. Next. So just a couple of numbers, 25 plants. We've got a map on one of the subsequent slides that'll show you that, the different product categories that we're in. And yeah, we take care of a boatload of wood residuals. And I'll emphasize now, but I will emphasize later as well, 100% of our feedstock is wood residuals. You know, there are no trees being cut down for the purpose of making wood pellets. And that's certainly an important component of the overall life cycle assessment as you consider wood heat. Next slide. So this gives you a visual of where we have our plants. You know, we can cover most of the country where it gets cold. Obviously, some missing in the mountain area, and for some of the other categories that we participate in, like grilling pellets, we're not represented well in the south. But in any case, lots of plants, lots of capacity, and yes, we have a very real responsibility that we take very seriously to ensure that pellets remain available to American consumers. This was certainly something a year ago when there was a very high demand for wood pellets in Europe that you know, was a factor that we had to strongly consider, but you know, the starting point for those considerations was that we were not going to leave any retailers and any consumers without pellets in the US. So next slide, please. Just a real high level overview of how pellets happen. Maybe the bottom line is that it's not a super simple process. On one level, yeah, you're pressing sawdust into pellets and those are burned, but it is a real manufacturing process. And the challenges related to it really have everything to do with the variability of the wood that's coming in, something that many of you, I'm sure, very well appreciate. But drying the residual, sizing the residual, and then pelletizing the residual. All three of those kind of technical steps are things that we are actively involved in improving to make more efficient or to make the end product better performing. Move on to the next slide, please. And just a point around the LCA of pellet heating. At a high level, carbon neutral is relatively straightforward to understand. And certainly when you factor in avoided emissions, in fact, there's a negative carbon impact from using pellets for heating. And these are the results of an LCA that were conducted by another trade industry group, BTEC, really valuable perspective. Again, 100% of our material is residual material, and we're in the process of getting 100% of that material SFI certified. Again, as many folks know, there are a number of different certification programs that you can participate in. We have so far at least elected to go with SFI and hope to have that completed by the end of next calendar year. Next slide. So when it comes to heat pumps, how do we think about them? Well, I mean, really, it's another quiver in the another arrow in the quiver. I don't think anybody should view it as the solution, if you will. It has, as with any technology, it has its pluses and it has its minuses. From a consumer standpoint, one of the things that we well appreciate is that consumers really choose heating with pellets for economic reasons. In many areas, it is by far the lowest cost choice for them to heat their homes. And the pricing is also stable. Stable means stable pricing, but stable availability as well. And there is something reassuring that we have heard from many of our consumers that they can load up, their garage or their basement or shed with a couple tons of material at the beginning of the winter and know that they will have heat that winter. And that's very satisfying. And not having to guess or wonder what the cost of the fuel is going to be next month. There are a number of government incentives that have made pellet heating, along with other renewable heating systems, more accessible. We'd like to see those strengthened and highlighted. One of the moving on to the next point, there is a very clear window in which, at least based on the research that we've done, where heat pumps do make sense. But that is not for every temperature. And it's very important for consumers to understand. I think probably most of the folks on this call understand, but consumers to understand, and at the same time, policymakers to understand that the economics and the efficiency, driven by the efficiency of the systems, varies with the outside temperature. And somewhat paradoxically or unfortunately, the colder it gets, the lower the efficiency of heat pumps are. That's not a negative against heat pumps. That's just, I think, an important, genuine aspect to recognize about them. There certainly have been advances over the past few years, and I would well anticipate, confidently anticipate, that there will be further advances that bring down the outdoor temperature at which a heat pump can effectively work, and provide heat under a good economic feedback. And then again, important for consumers, I would suspect that most of us on the call don't need to hear this, but electricity isn't inherently green or sustainable. You need to understand how it's being generated. Never mind that the grid needs continued investment in building greater transmission capacity. But fundamentally, the electricity, the source of the electricity, how it's being generated, needs to be understood for a proper carbon accounting of heat pumps to be factored in. Just a point around the difference between the pellets that we make for residential home heating and industrial pellets. Generally speaking, we have tighter specifications, primarily around ash and primarily around BTU content. Whereas a lot of export pellets are valued based on their BTU content and priced accordingly. When we sell a bag of heating pellets, we're selling 40 pounds of heat, if you will, and the consumer is expecting that they will get the same amount of energy, the same amount of heat from that bag as they did from the previous bag that they used. They're not paying on a per BTU basis, so we have to be more consistent in the energy content of the material, and we have to have a lower ash content, which puts some restrictions on the feedstock that we're able to use. With respect to weather trends and climate change in general, I think it's a bit hard to predict whether the net warming of the climate is going to lessen the need for heat, because at the same time, we have an exaggeration of the extreme temperatures that we're all sustaining. So while there may be fewer heating days out there, the heating days that are out there are tending to be more extreme at this point. So I will hit pause there and turn it back over to John. And if there are any questions, certainly glad to address them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Frank. This is John Ackerley. I'm president of the Alliance for Green Heat, and we are, it's a great discussion. I really appreciate that, your perspective. And even though you are a leading producer of a potential competitor, I think it's very notable and important that you all see yourself as a complement and not a competitor. Okay, our next speaker is Karen Harmon-Smeltz. And I'm so glad we could have Karen on. I've known Karen since I began this area in 2009. She is, as many of you know, she's the daughter of Dane Harmon, who's the founder of Harmon Stoves, which is the pretty much acknowledged as the premier brand of pellet stoves. They are notably durable, I should say, in compared to many brands, and which is really important. It's important that when people buy a pellet stove, they have a good experience and it doesn't break down too quickly. And I think Harmon has set a standard, and so that is very important. So Karen, I'll turn it over to you, and thanks for taking some time to do this. Okay, can you unmute yourself? Okay, we had Karen on earlier and we could hear her. Karen, I'm going to make you a co-host in just a sec. Hopefully that will there, Karen, I just made you a co-host.
Awesome. There we are. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Let me see if I can do video too. Okay, we can. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that awesome introduction. That was really kind of you. So I want to take this opportunity to introduce everyone on the call to Forge and Flame. So this is our new master brand for Harmon, Vermont Castings, and Quadrifire. We just launched this the end of July. And this is essentially our unified marketing vehicle that we'll use to capture, engage, educate, and motivate those consumers to buy stoves. So we're really excited about it. It's going awesome so far. Our tagline is "It's warmer here," and that really applies to everything that we're about. Go ahead and you're welcome to scan that QR code that you'll see here, as well as on the last slide, to learn more about Forge and Flame. And you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to share with you, number one, the fact that we do a lot of consumer research. And it's important that we continue to look at who are the customers today. They are changing a little. What are their purchase drivers? Why are they purchasing a stove, specifically a pellet stove or a wood stove? And then what are the conflicts that might be the barrier to their purchase? Why could they maybe not be buying? So we know that they're millennials, they're Gen Xers. So we're talking 25 to 55 are really looking at this market. Single family home, they've owned that home for 5 to 10 years. Purchase drivers, of course, you can imagine they need heat and they're trying to save money. And I think that since the beginning of time, that's been a big reason of why people buy stoves. But what's also interesting is that feeling of preparedness and sustainability. And those keep popping up higher into the top numbers. So there's no ignoring the fact that sustainability is important, and as well as just being able to be prepared for anything. Then also, as far as barriers to purchase, why might they not be choosing to purchase? And we know that's a lot about price, right? So we're thankful for that tax credit. That 30% up to $2,000 is awesome. And we're fortunate to have 19 products that qualify for that tax credit within Forge and Flame. What you're seeing here also is the replacement rate. So a recent poll is showing 68% of those purchases out there for stoves and inserts are replacing an older unit. So we don't expect heat pumps to make that stop. We expect that to keep going. And then you're also seeing this really great number of, people adding a stove for the first time. And I see some of our trade partner friends on the call here. And that's great for them, because it's not just selling a stove, it's then a hearth pad, it's installation, it's pipe, and it's definitely a more profitable situation for them as we sell more stoves. So you can go ahead to the next slide. So what is the real benefit of adding a stove or an insert to a home that already has a heat pump? I can tell the story of the house I used to live in had a heat pump. And I'm here in Pennsylvania, had a pellet stove as well. And when that pellet stove was not on, boy, it's a different kind of heat. All of you that are on the call might have already experienced that, right? It's just a warmer, more complete, even heat when you're using pellet and wood. And I don't know that electric will ever compete with that version of warmth. But some other benefits is the whole zone heating, right? So you can heat specific rooms, you can target where you want that heat, and certainly pellet is very cost effective in that situation. And if you think about it, we're really paying for the temperature differential in our home, and so zone heating can certainly help with that. And then ambiance, just like the pictures that you're seeing in the slide, like you don't get that with a heat pump. You connect around a fire. It is just a completely an innate situation. And so that connection, that sense of well-being that comes from the ambiance of a real fire is like nothing else. And we don't imagine that going away anytime soon. And then they're built for cold weather efficiency. That is why stoves exist, right? We're ready for cold weather. They can take a beating and they keep on heating. And certainly that's our goal at Forge and Flame. For battery backups, right? We talked a little bit on the last slide about that sense of preparedness that we know consumers are really concerned about. And so being able to have a battery backup on a pellet stove, or if you have a wood stove that you're not using the blower, then you don't even need that. So it really helps with that sense of preparedness, as well as cooking options on wood stoves. I mean, hey, filet mignon in 6 minutes, if you're a medium rare fan, you can actually do that on our top load wood stoves. And, you know, we all know that wood stoves are selling really well, and as our pellet, but, you know, specifically wood, especially through COVID, and being able to have all these extra features that are really important to surviving life in bad weather and without electricity is a very cool thing that we're very proud to offer. Then moving on to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability and what that means for us at Forge and Flame. We are very fortunate that our manufacturing process is very committed to sustainable practices, that we are manufacturing in a facility that is zero waste to landfill, among other things. And it's really neat that not only do we have a story about how we manufacture our product, but that it continues the sustainability journey into the home of the consumer. And we know they're growing in awareness of this. We know that it's consumers are more likely to buy from a company that has a sustainability message. So here are some just highlights from our Halifax plant and from Forge and Flame. So we use 100% renewable energy in all of our operations across our whole corporation. All of our cast iron is 100% recycled, typically from old brake drums. And so that means every piece of cast iron, every Harmon, every Vermont Castings, and every Quadrifire cast iron is 100% recycled cast iron. And we recycle 100% of our scrap steel. Then for the products that we are making with steel at this point, it is 60% of the steel products that we make are made with recycled steel, and we continue to have a goal to grow that number. We talked about the tax credit. We have 19 products that qualify for that. And we have a zero waste to landfill manufacturing plant in our Halifax, Pennsylvania facility. All right, moving on, we can talk a little bit more about what we're doing for consumers and our trade partners. So it's important for us to talk about that tax credit, to make sure that when cost is a factor, that consumers know they can get that up to $2,000 back. And so we do have a tax credit social media kit that we provide for our trade partners, and we provide instructions and explain to them how they can get the message out there on their social media as well as print. We have showroom point of sale, and we also have a website dedicated just to tax credit and what that means and how a consumer can save. So moving on to the next slide, you know, this topic did provoke some action on our part, John. You know, we've always focused on zone heating. Again, it's innate to us. It's part of what our business is. But we realized we were missing some educational content on how heat pumps can be complemented with stoves. So we are working on a blog as we speak that will help push that content out there. So that is all I have for you today. I'm happy to field any other questions or conversations offline.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. That was a great presentation. And I'm glad you're working on a blog on heat pumps. I think a lot of stove companies will. On a personal level, I just put in some heat pumps. I'm looking forward to seeing how they work with my pellet stove this winter.
Yeah, we want to hear that too.
All right. So we're going to launch our first poll and get some of your perspectives about what's going to happen with pellet heating and whether everyone on this webinar today thinks that it will go up or down or stay the same. So, and as we do that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Scott Williamson, even though his screen says he's Darian Dyer.
Yeah.
Some glitch that happened. Scott is has been my go-to person over the last decade to understand pellet stoves. He started as an independent repair technician, and he's repaired thousands and thousands of pellet stoves, and he knows how to repair any pellet stove. And he almost knows what's going to go wrong in which year on any brand. So he's been an enormous resource, and look forward to his presentation. I'm going to end the poll now, but looks like most people think that pellets are going to go up, and no one thinks they're going to go down a lot. That's interesting. And yeah, thanks for participating. We'll have another one in a minute. Now I will turn it over to.
Can you hear me, John?
Turn over to Scott. Yes, I can.
Oh, perfect.
Go ahead.
All right. Part of getting this thing ready here. 6 things our industry continually gets wrong was put out there before I thought about it, because it's 6 things that people often get wrong about our industry. But that's what I was going for anyway. Yeah, and thanks for the intro, John. I appreciate it. So this is a busy time of year for me. I sold my company in a service company in 2019, and I now work for the largest pellet stove parts retailer probably in the world. And we ship everywhere, and we manage about 4 warehouses. And so now I research all of these parts, which was the biggest problem that I had when I was actually servicing New England, was getting the parts to make all the repairs. And what's really surprising, and I'll show you in some of my graphs here, is you can move to the next slide. There we go. 6 things we should all understand about pellet stoves. This is kind of an overview of what I was thinking. And that there was always a rivalry between wood stoves, pellet stoves, and folks should understand that a pellet stove is a wood stove. It's an automated wood stove, and it has its place. It's never going to really replace the rural wood stove that is traditional, just stick wood, but it doesn't need to. It allowed the wood stove to get closer to the city, and they're in suburban areas now, in single family homes, which wood stoves were disappearing from. So it fills a void. And coincidentally, those single family homes that are closer to urban areas, they have other types of heating systems. So you're looking at a partnership of heat in a home, as opposed to one system doing everything, which is really what a pellet stove is. It is a supplemental heat source, and working with a heat pump, it's not a this or that. It's the 2 things working together. Because let's move on to the next slide. Pellet stove is that suburban wood stove. They're automated, and they won't go to the rural areas, but they won't go to the urban areas. They fit that niche in the middle. Pellet stoves are generally only exist in a single family home, where you're going to probably have a heat pump, and there are lots of folks, including you, John, because I think you just installed some heat pumps. And the majority of single family homes in the US are located in suburban areas. Next slide. This is a good little graphic here. I wasn't allowed to actually release numbers, John, on what those blue shades mean. But in 2021, these are all of the, on the graph on the right, these are all the states in the United States we sent parts to. Darkest being the most parts, and lightest being the least amount of parts. And as you can see, every single state is represented there. And it's funny because Florida, we actually sent more to Florida than we did to Connecticut, which is crazy. And if you look over to the left, you would think that the pellet stoves are only going to, or are going to exist in these blue areas where it's cold. But that's not really what happens. Pellet stoves exist everywhere in the United States. And as a supplemental source, they're very efficient and they're very easy to understand and use and implement. Next slide. All right. So here's where you kind of get a little bit of the numbers. 2021 orders by state. The most amount of parts that we sent to any single state was New York, and it was just under 6,000 for the year. And this one actually includes some places in Canada. But you can see that there's many states in here, like Arizona, where we're sending more pellet stove parts than we are to places that you would think would get them, like Nebraska. And some of this has to do with shipping costs. We're on the East Coast, people are on the West Coast. I tried to do a weighted average to figure that out, and I couldn't get it done in time. That's what was holding me up with the slides. But as you can see, there's many places in here, like Texas, for example. Texas is a big one. And who would have thought? Before I saw all this stuff, I wouldn't have known. But they all require parts, and they all require maintenance. And as you can see, it's not just in the coldest areas, it's everywhere. And I challenge anybody to find an independent service technician for a pellet stove in Texas. It's probably not going to happen, but we got a lot of parts going there. Next slide. They're an easy to understand concept for heating your home. What I've always loved about pellet stoves and wood stoves is that I can buy all of the fuel that I need for an entire winter, and I can physically have it. Like, I know where it is. I know how much I paid for it. I can shop around. I can have fuel left over from the previous year that I carry over. There's no flexibility for heating your home that allows you to be able to do that besides heating with wood, or heating with, if you got to buy something, it's nice to be able to have it and store it in your home. Number 5, next slide. And stove sales alone aren't the only metric for figuring out how our industry is doing. And we'll go back to this graph again. I think the speaker before me was highlighting, the reasons, the barriers of people getting into the market. And when more people aren't entering the market, you got to figure out how to sustain your business when times are tougher. So you got to reach back out to the same people, and selling parts to them is or should be a huge part of any company's bottom line, because it was my entire bottom line. And I work for a company, and it's still the same kind of thing. I just don't have to drive and get behind the stove in a corner of a house anymore. And number 6, let's go to the next one. Yeah, supplemental heating solutions exist because there is no perfect other solution. Heat pumps are fantastic, 500% efficiency if you do it right. But as it gets colder, it becomes less and less and less efficient. So you need something else. A wood stove can't do a whole entire house, so you have larger systems that are centralized. It's important to understand that the pellet stove is a supplemental heating device. If you have a small house centrally located, it could be everything until it's not. But that's really all that I got.
Okay, thanks so much, Scott. I think what you're touching on is crucial. We all know that pellet heating works as long as the pellet stove works. And for for this community to have confidence in the technology, the stoves have to keep working, or you need to be able to fix them yourself or find a technician. And finding a technician is not always the easiest thing. And as a result, we can estimate how many stoves have been sold over the years, but no one knows how many stoves are still working. And so it may be that only half the stoves that have been sold in the last 20 years are operational. We've heard the figure like 1 million or a bit over 1 million pellet stoves are in operation currently. And that figure seems to be pretty stable, but it's really just a guess. Okay, I'm going to run another poll here. Now, I think you could, did everyone see the, okay, that's the last one we did. Future projections. Next one, wait, why is this? Sorry about this, folks. We're not, okay, we're going to get now some opinions on heat pumps. And this is a kind of a personal question, not for the market in general, but what's your opinion on heat pumps for your own home? And can everyone see that? Yeah, okay. Looks like it was starting to take it. And I will introduce our next speaker, who I know very well because I hired her last year, and she's been a great addition to the AGH staff. Darian Dyer is our policy analyst. She's based in Arkansas. She has a graduate degree in renewable energy from university in Germany. And she is going to talk about our perspective on this issue and our work forwarding the electrification of heat as paired with wooden pellets. And let me, before you start, Darren, let me end this poll and show it to everyone. So the majority of people said that heat pumps seem like a good idea. I'm ready to learn more. A few said you can tear my heat pump out of my cold, dead hands. So there are some real diehards in the room, which is good to see. And a few more people who said, I'm good, I'll stick with something else, that are not interested in ever getting one. Okay, thanks for doing that. We'll have another coming up after Darian speaks.
Yeah, so thank you, John, for your for your introduction. And I'll quickly go through this. I know we're coming up on the hour. We are on the hour, actually. So this will just be really quick. For us, when we look at new electrification policy that comes up, there are kind of 3 points that we are immediately aware of. One, yes, we support electrification. We're for better investment. We're for creating more incentives, really paying attention to how low to moderate income households can immediately gain a lot of these incentives. So point of purchase rebates, those kind of things. We also want to make sure that the policy is able to have an integration of advanced wood heating. So sometimes you'll see some policies that are prohibiting all combustion, and we're like, oh, let's do this instead. Or you'll see some policies that are banning all unregulated fuels. So that's something we're really looking for, and we're trying to get advanced wood heating at the top of the list, because policymakers sometimes don't understand that it's a really great component. The other is just promoting best technology. We know that heat pumps are appropriate for most homes, especially in the urban areas, but we also want to make sure that wooden pellet heaters are there for LMI households. So on the first point, supporting electrification, we know it's evident that we have to begin transitioning away from fossil fuels. And some details on that, of course, we're always thinking about what's the footprint of our buildings in the US. It's pretty high, about 30%. Buildings are generating, and it's about 38% of that's coming from heating and cooling. So this is kind of a low-hanging fruit in some ways to be able to decarbonize. We know that there are already substitutes that are ready to be implemented, so that's why. And ensuring integration, like I said, there is some policy language sometimes that would ban all combustion or all unregulated fuels, not fans, and we try to combat that. Pellet heating is safe and low carbon combustion. I think all of our panelists have kind of hit on this topic. Huge is that cordwood heating is essential for rural households. We know that they're out of electricity more often. We know that connections to the electric grid can be sketchy. So it's we really need an option for them. And we know that it's quite price stable. Biomass, wood, pellet, instead of having the volatile kind of like jumps in pricing that natural gas often has, electric can have. Biomass is really keeping super stable. So it's good for budgeting. It's good for low income, or really any household that's sticking to a budget and they want to know what's coming up instead of being surprised by a big bill. And in promoting best technology, like I said, heat pumps big. We really don't want policy language that could accidentally promote electrical resistance heating or baseboard heating. This would increase energy cost burdens on low to moderate income, especially renters, and in affordable housing. So that's huge, that we want actual language that's saying, you know what, when we're promoting electrification, we want pellet stoves in the right places. We want wood stoves in the right places, but we also don't want the bad electric appliances in those places. And a lot of that comes from the idea that energy bill savings are apparent. The DOE has estimates between 400 to 1,000 in a year fuel switching, and that's can depend on, of course, housing size, existing fuel prices. But even on a fossil fuel dependent electric grid, we know that there's still saving on emissions when you do switch from a gas furnace. So we think that's pretty important because it's often a talking point for the fossil fuel industry to prevent the switching to heat pumps. And so what we've done so far, this little graphic on the right is something I kind of came up with. We think it's fun. It's also about just trying to get wood stoves in the conversation, get biomass in the conversation to being a great partner in electrification work. And so we are trying to cultivate this electrification culture that includes wood heating. And we previously advocated on Massachusetts electrification bill. We've advocated for stronger language dissuading electrical resistance in Maryland. That was one where they said to the strongest considerations to keep out electric baseboard heating, but we wanted something a little bit more specific. And we've also advocated for taking out language that banned unregulated fuels, which was out in New Jersey, which we realize New Jersey is one of the only states that really doesn't have a technical political definition of a rule. But pellet can also be great for the suburban areas. And so I won't go through all of these just to stick to the time, but these are some key strategies to consider. A lot of these, you know, John has been like great in explaining, and it's really learn as we go, but we do know that there are some important change out programs in smoke prone areas, R&D. It's a whole thing that we have to keep our eyes on. So John, are any questions?
Thanks, Darian, and thanks for keeping it short. We're just at the top of the hour, and we're going to now go to questions. But before we do questions, I'm going to throw up one more poll, and this is maybe the most controversial poll that we could think of. Oh, it's not letting me launch it. Can anyone see the poll? Darian? No. We wanted to ask what people thought about restricting gas hookups, but it's not letting me launch this one.
I just launched it, John, I believe. It's restrictions on installing heaters.
Oh, did you? Can everyone see it?
I hope so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Darian. And while you take that poll, here's email contacts. You know, one of the great things about these webinars is we really want to be able to keep the conversations going, connect you with our speakers so that you can follow up and network, ask questions. We won't be able to get to all the questions today, but whatever is in the chat, we will have that, make sure to answer that and send that to you. Okay. Darren, do you want to show the results of that before we?
Sure, it
Go.
looks like it's fluctuating a bit, so I'm going to give it a couple of seconds and then I'll end the poll.
Okay.
Got some late answers.
When I call on the first person, James Williams, can you unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, I am unmuted. Thank you, John. So this question is probably for Darian or anyone else who can take it. Darren, you were in Germany for 2 years. Pardon me, I just had a very spicy lunch. You were in Germany for 2 years. While you were there, did you notice or see anything that would be applicable to the United States? So applications of biomass, and biomass being utilized in ways that we haven't really seen here.
Biomass wise, so I did my graduate studies in Freiburg, which is actually like the sunniest part, the warmer part of Germany. So biomass isn't as used there, at least in the older buildings that I lived in terms of rent affordability. It was always like old natural gas stoves. I will say though, for part of that time, I was in Italy writing my thesis, and even in the South, no, there's no biomass, but in the North, they're using it like crazy. I mean, it's something that's really important. Of course, heat pumps are everywhere as well. A lot of those models in Italy are quite old, so they're not ones that are the newer ones that are withstanding like -15 degrees Fahrenheit or anything like that. But they're perfect for kind of the Mediterranean climate. Germany, though, I was never in a building that was biomass. I know it's pretty popular for electric generation in Europe, which we don't touch on as much in our advocacy. But yeah, that's that was my only like kind of like firsthand view of like energy use.
Okay, and Darren, did you close that poll?
Yep, should be sharing results now.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and tell people what you found?
Yep, so it looks like a majority of people are saying new gas installs should not be allowed in the long term. There's a few, but the second leader is new installs of gas stoves should never be restricted. So we've got a really good mix of people in our participant list right now. The lowest one looks like new installed cordwood heaters should never be allowed. I think that's ... yeah, in urban areas. So we've got a great mix of opinions here.
Okay, thanks. Now feel free to raise your hand or to type a question in the chat. And we'll call on you. Let's see, Darian, can you see the chat as well?
I can pull it up. So it looks like Vanden, hopefully that I pronounced that correctly. How successful has AGH been in New York State? Has advanced wood heating been excluded from the incentive mix? So this was a huge one that happened. New York, they were the first state itself to actually create legislation for electrification. So there are many cities that have done this in California specifically, and there are some states that have done it in their energy code, but New York was different as being like the first one to do it the way they did. And we wrote a blog on it. We didn't have a lot of advocacy like towards policymakers, but we did write a blog on it, which I will link, which has our opinion and kind of what we found out, because we did talk to HPBA and we also talked to electrification advocates. So that should be pretty insightful. I'll get that to you.
Most of these policies are still working their way through comment. Most of them haven't been finalized. A lot of them are just policies that will launch a study to proceed. So we haven't, there are not too many, especially in the East Coast. I think there's some more in the West Coast. Okay, Peter Parsons, if you can unmute. Go ahead with your
Hey
question.
guys, I think it was a fantastic presentation today. I've been in the hearth industry now for over 20 years, and we were primarily an HVAC dealer first, and hearth became our biggest thing. Heat pumps, I've been fighting heat pumps as a retailer for many years, and we're a big Harman dealer here. So it's great to see Karen there. You know, heat pumps, I think a lot of the myths, a lot of things like being in Newfoundland for us, I often say that Newfoundland is the litmus test for the rest of North America. We see higher costs of living here and all these things. And our government currently, with this big $13 billion dam project that we just put in a few years ago, the government is trying to recoup the costs back on us Newfoundlanders to pay for this overtures that they've done in this. And they're pushing heat pumps in a really big way. Like, there is no incentives, there's no grants, there's nothing in Newfoundland for anything other than electricity. And we're noticing there's going to be a problem with that. With over 2 decades of being in this industry, the issue that we have with heat pumps, and especially Newfoundland, is moisture content and those kinds of things are never factored into temperature. And I would argue that, and I'll use Celsius because I don't know my American numbers, but at -5 in Newfoundland, I've always argued is colder than -20 in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan and stuff where they're not around moisture content. And we have a lot of issues with heat pumps in Newfoundland, generally because we're surrounded by salt water, and the moisture content often affects the performance. So when we get down around -5, the units are going into defrost mode, and the outside coils are freezing up, and we don't have a lot of these. They don't work as well as they should be at the temperatures advertised. So one of the things that we did was we actually got out of that industry. We stopped selling heat pumps for that reason, because it became calls all the time to our techs, you know, to our staff, that it's like, hey, there's something wrong with my heat pump. It's got it's not working. There's no heat coming from it. And up on the wall, there's a little logo there that says DF on it. What's that mean? And I was like, well, defrost. Unit's shutting itself down. So it's not working as well as it should be at the temperatures. But, you know, I paid for a unit that works up to -20 or -25. And, you know, that's always been the thing for us. And that's kind of how we, you know, sell as many pellet stoves and stuff as we do. And I wanted to come on here because I like where this is going today, and like to see a lot of these numbers, and there's a lot of stuff that we've been able to take from this, watching this, and I just want to you guys say a big bouquet and thank you for everything you've done today.
Oh, thanks, Peter. And you know, I think that's a really good input. I myself didn't really realize the importance of moisture in the air, and realizing the East Coast, you know, we have a lot more moisture generally than in certainly the mountain states in the higher altitudes where it's super dry. So that's something to watch out, and thanks so much for that input. Okay, Noel, if you can unmute yourself, you're up next.
Hello, this is Noel. I'm a Smokeless Chimney on the internet. We are working with various experts to measure smoke emissions from wood stoves. Pellet stoves are different than wood stoves. However, what value do you see in monitoring smoke emissions from pellet stoves in the laboratory certification process and at the user's location in the field?
I can take a stab at that, and then I'll let any of the other speakers. I mean, personally, I think you know, the good thing about pellet stoves is that they do perform in the field much more similarly than they do in the lab. This is a classic problem with wood stoves. Wood stove can perform great in the lab. It can perform horribly in the hands of consumers who use unseasoned wood, don't get enough air. But I still think it's important to test pellet stoves in the field, because pellet stoves do change, especially over time, and especially if they're not cleaned. So I suspect that year after year, pellet stove could lose both efficiency and gain emissions. And that's important to understand. And I think it's important for consumers to understand that there is a linkage, and that if they don't maintain their pellet stove, they could lose efficiency and be putting more smoke, even though that smoke still may not be very visible. You know, a lot of pellet stoves pretty reliably work with where the PM is below what's visible. Doesn't mean there's no PM, of course, but I think it's really valuable to test them in the field, and I think it's really valuable to test different brands to see how brands hold up over time. So, and let me see if anyone else wants to answer that, any speaker or really anyone else on the webinar. So if someone wants to take a stab at that, just raise your hand. I think Scott Williamson got off, and he would be someone I'd be interested to listen to. I know, Karen, you want to?
I can take a little bit of that. So on behalf of the pellet stove manufacturer, we do extensive beta testing as well. So call that your field testing, specifically for new products. So not only are they rigorously tested over a long period of time and accelerated life in our plant and in our lab, we also do beta testing on all of our new products. So put them in a real new home situation and let that consumer burn it for several months and report back on how that's going. So that's how I can help you explain how we currently do a field test.
Thanks, Karen. So Darren, hey, can you throw up one more poll question?
Sure.
And let's see if anyone else has a comment, not just a question, but feel free to comment on anything you've heard today. So this last question is just feedback for us, how informative, how useful it was. We intend to do these every couple months, and also would feel free to privately send us topics that you think would be good to cover.
And it looks like there's another question from Lauren in the chat. Is there any research regarding how heat pumps work in higher elevations, like in the mountain areas of Colorado? I do know that there was a paper published just a few days ago, actually on the 11th, talking about how heat pumps are suitable for all European countries. So I will link to that. Does anyone else have a better answer?
Anyone from mountain states that have experience? I suspect they work great, and I think it's because there's low humidity. I think they're good. I don't see any reason why altitude would impact them.
And specifically in this paper, Lauren and anyone else who wants to click on the link, they do talk about how it's even working great in the colder countries.
Okay, so if there are no other questions, I think we can wrap it up. It's 1:20. We're almost at the end anyway, and I really thank everyone for participating, and especially our speakers who I guess I should also say that I'm quite heartened by our speakers. I did not know what Frank and Karen would say coming as mainstays of our industry would say about what is really potentially a competitor. But I think it's very positive that we embrace other low carbon technologies. And I think that will help us as we try to become part of what policymakers view as important components of renewable energy policy. Any other final comments from any of our speakers? Okay, if not, then again, thanks everyone, and I will we'll have our next one, registration for our next one in the next couple of weeks. So thanks and have a great day.